clarification on the role of this group. So I'm just going to jump in. A few months ago, there was a headline on the front page of the Deseret News, "Why Utah has a once-in-a-generation opportunity unique to any other place in the world." Speaking of this Draper Correctional Facility site. And they took this language from some real estate consultants who had looked at the site and said that there is it's so rare to get nearly 700 acres of land in the middle of one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country, in the heart of a burgeoning high-tech sector, and have essentially a blank canvas to work from. That is a significant opportunity, and many have repeated this as they've come into town. We've had site selectors say they can't think of an opportunity like this anywhere else in the country. With that opportunity comes a lot of responsibility, and we feel it clearly that we need to take advantage of this opportunity, and that's why we're reaching out to you. So I think you're familiar with the Draper Correctional Facility site. About 700 acres, been in operation since 1950. And interestingly, it's the actual prison is a fairly small part of the land. If you look out toward Baker Highway there and surrounding the prison property, there's a lot of undeveloped land that creates some nice opportunities for us. The legislature created the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority in 2018. And among other things, gave us some objectives that they'd like us to meet as part of this project. And I think that's relevant to our discussion today. First of all, creating jobs and helping to develop our highly trained workforce. I also talk about quality of life on the site and in surrounding communities. Make this a great place for people of Utah to live. We know that traffic is a big concern in the area. And so they talked about strategic residential and commercial growth, essentially finding a balance between jobs and housing so that people can live near where they work and minimize the need to jump in their cars. Preserving natural lands, enhancing recreational opportunities. You can think of parks and open space. Think of connecting some of our regional trails like Bonneville Shoreline Trail through the prison site to the Jordan River Parkway Trail, things like that. Improving air quality, minimizing resource use. Air quality is a concern in this state. We all know that. And the legislature would like us to implement techniques and features that improve air quality, reduce our water use, reduce our energy use. I mentioned the importance of transportation, and they've directed us to look at transportation infrastructure, including, and the quote is, world-class transit on this site. And we've got very active discussions underway right now with UTA, the transportation agencies and surrounding communities to extend transit through the site down into Utah County. And Jonathan, I know you've been waiting for that at Adobe for a long time, so we're trying to speed that up. Complement development on surrounding properties. We've got to be a good neighbor. We want to be a good neighbor. We're touching on Bluffdale. We're within Draper, a number of other communities nearby. We need to be planning concurrently to make sure that we don't unintentionally create problems elsewhere. And then interestingly, they asked us to explore a nationally recognized research center or university presence, a place where innovation can thrive. Mentioned earlier that we're led by a board of 11, and it's a board that is established by statute. Our co-chairs are Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and State Representative Lowry Snow. I think it's really telling that they appointed Lowry Snow, a legislator from Washington County, to be on this board. It emphasizes what's important to all of us, which is this be a statewide project. Yeah, it's just 700 acres, but strategically located, and we think that done right, we can create benefits statewide. The other board members, Mayor Don Ramsey from South Jordan, Senator Jerry Stevenson, Representative Stephen Handy, Jim Russell, who's the director of the Division of Facilities, Construction, and Management for the state that oversees development projects. Val Hale, who is, as April said, one of the co-chairs of this committee and the director of GOED, Governor's Office of Economic Development. Commissioner Dave Wolstenhume, who is the Commissioner of Higher Education. And this is a reflection of the importance of education, the university presence on this site. Senator Lincoln Fillmore, Mayor Troy Walker from Draper, and you met April, who adds tremendously to our board. The board adopted guiding principles earlier in the year, and I think it's worth mentioning those because they guide our decision, and we hope that you would consider them as we have our conversations. First is that we're promoting the public interest. This is a public project owned by the people of the state. We need to make sure that they get a return economically and socially. This is about the public interest above any private interest in the area. Second is set the standard. We want to have a high bar here. With this opportunity, we want to take advantage of it and make sure that we've got a development that will push the envelope a little bit, will set a standard that other developers can follow of sustainable development. Third is think regionally. If we focus solely on this site, we're going to miss opportunities and we could create some problems for surrounding communities. So we're committed to taking a regional view and doing things on this site that benefit the region, not just the site. Next is take the long view. We want this project to be relevant and benefiting Utah for generations to come. That means that we move a little bit slower so that we can do it right. We'll do that. We don't have the debt load that we need to worry about, which is one of the advantages of being state property. Next is be open and transparent. And because this is a state project, members of the state, residents of the state, deserve to know what's going on. So we're going to be open, share with them. And on that point, this meeting is being recorded. We're taking notes and we plan to put it on our website so that members of the public can know what these discussions sound like. So finally, act with integrity. This is an uncompromising commitment that we will do things in the right way and for the right reasons and non-negotiable. And we're not starting from scratch. In 2016, well, there's been a lot of talk about this site, as Derek mentioned, and a lot of thought about moving the prison for decades. But in 2016, the legislature created the Point of the Mountain Development Commission to look at development in the Point of the Mountain region. So not just this prison site, but kind of Sandy to Saratoga Springs. And they conducted an extensive public process using Envision Utah and a consulting team, involved well over 4,000 people, had dozens and dozens of public meetings, online input, and really have helped advance the view of what could happen in this region. They did scenarios that included scenarios on this prison site and selected scenario D and E, which is kind of a mix of uses, some density, really trying to come up with a vision that would be compelling and work in the marketplace and work practically. In fact, I think in that photo, I see a couple of you at the table there. Many of you may have seen this, but this is the vision that came out of that process for the region. And in the middle there is sort of a map of transportation ideas, many of which, I think in fact most of which, have made it into our regional transportation plan. You can see that the prison site is kind of right in the middle of that area and presents some real opportunities. Now, there were various themes that came out of that public process, things that the public overwhelmingly thought was important. Jobs and highly trained workforce. On the environmental side, improving air quality, reduced resource use, connected trails, parks, open space. Want a place where people can gather and enjoy being together. I hope that is in our near future. Community design, vibrant urban centers, jobs close to where people live, variety of communities and housing. The transportation end, looking for more north-south connections, alternative parallel paths through that narrow neck of land. A connected street network, more of a grid that allows people to get around in ways other than everybody being funneled towards specific arterials or freeways. World-class public transit, looking at east-west connections to address that significant transportation challenge. And then focusing specifically on this prison site, making it a catalytic center, a place that can set the tone for other development in the region, and university and research presence. I think all of that should sound familiar to you. That's the language and the priorities that were outlined in the statute that created the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority. That conveys to me an important message that the legislature was listening to this extensive public input and translated it into the goals for development in this region. And we certainly intend to follow that. I will say that the consultants who worked on this compared, life in 2050 under this vision with life under kind of baseline scenarios or doing business as usual. And there were a number of benefits that came out of it. A couple that stood out to me. One was that local and state revenues on the baseline would be $12 billion over that period of time in this region. With the vision, they'd be 19.7. So, $7.7 billion more. It's a big deal. There was also a finding that building out our region under these principles would add $10,000 to the average annual household income on the Wasatch Front. So by 2050, every household on the Wasatch Front would have $10,000 more based on the economic development and jobs created in this area. And importantly, transportation times, driving times through this area would be reduced significantly. All right, that gets to these working groups and your role. We've got 5 groups that we've created, meeting monthly for about 2 hours. This is the 5th of the 5 meeting this week. First was stakeholder group, which is kind of elected officials representing the people that live in the area. The education, research, and innovation is folks in technology development and transfer research at the universities, many from our high-tech and biotech communities. Environment and air quality included state agencies, conservation groups, venture capital that is focused on sustainability. Then for the infrastructure and land use, a lot of regional and local planners from the area trying to help us think through how these ideas are translated into roads, land use on the map, and the infrastructure we need. And then this group plays what we think is just an absolutely key role, thinking about how we best accomplish that state goal of advancing our economic opportunities, bringing in jobs. That involves recruiting some of the best companies to this site and being a little selective about it. It also involves looking at investment opportunities and ways that we can supplement public funds to achieve the vision that we have. These groups are really important to us. The board recognizes the limits on its knowledge and time and asked us to reach out to real experts in the area to gather input, feed it to them. They are, by law, the decision-making group, but they want real input into the process. There's a reason that we've got members of our board as the co-chairs of these groups, because they're going to take the information that they hear directly back to our board so that there's a clear line of communication. This is just kind of a timeline showing, Prison Relocation Commission formed in 2014, moving through to planning the master plan for this site. I'll just tell you a couple of points here. One, the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority was created in 2018. The board started operating shortly after that. They hired me. I'm still the only employee about a year ago. We've got consultants, RCL Co., that has been doing real estate analysis. We've had engineers do a site survey on the site, looking at archaeological, environmental, wetlands, underground utilities, geotechnical, historical buildings, etc., and have not found any material barriers to development, which is good news. But as we're laying out kind of the analytical basis for this, understanding the market, what uses would make sense at this site, trying to get a firm market grounding for this project. We're also starting the planning process. And you met Steve Kellenberg, who's going to help us put together and run that process. We would hope that we'll have an RFP out this fall to targeting some of the best planning firms in the world. We anticipate some sort of design competition that will get a lot of attention. We'll select the best planning team and hope to get them working early in the calendar year on a master plan for this site, with the hope of having that plan in pretty good shape a year from now. That's going to be a big step. I think everybody wants to know what's going to happen here. What's it going to look like? And getting that done is going to be a big deal. So where do you fit in? We're looking for help on various levels. I think as an initial matter, we want your input on some key economic development features that we would like to see at this site. What features would advance the economic development mission, would attract the best companies, etc. We'll use some of those principles and ideas in the RFP process so that those who respond to the RFP demonstrate the skills and ideas to make it happen. Beyond that, we'll want your continuing input in developing ideas for the master plan. And as we get into that, we'll also want your impact and your feedback and input into how we ought to conduct recruitment. What types of businesses should we be recruiting? How do we go about doing that? How can we attract investment to this site and the project? So that's a pretty critical agenda for this group. We don't want to overwhelm you. We may call on a few of you to help us between meetings. And I think you can probably see that there's overlap in the mission of some of these groups. Certainly some of the ideas we have for economic development will have to be translated into a land use concept and a transportation concept. So we may have a little cross-pollinating going on among these groups as needed and as you're willing. So That's far too much for me, but that kind of gives an overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about where we are or your role before we move on.
Thanks, Alan. This is April again. So really, this is the part of the meeting that we just want to start hearing from all of you. So you guys each have really unique backgrounds. You have skills and talents that you bring to the table. We kind of have the issue that we don't want all 3 million residents of Utah involved in saying what needs to go on this 700 acres. But we also don't want it to just be developed out in a little tiny vacuum and this little development board or our board authority trying to say what goes there. So we're trying to bring people in from different commercial sectors, from education, from economic development, and just throw out ideas and get an idea of what you think should go there or what your vision is for this area so that we can start presenting that to our board. And again, as Alan says, these other groups that are meeting, education and let's see, which other ones? We had infrastructure. As they meet too, they'll kind of throw out ideas, and then all of this will help us develop this RFP for the master planner so that we can put out a proposal and hire a planner that we think's going to drop what'll be a really nice site for us to leave for generations. So that's the other thing that we've talked about significantly as a board, that we really want to think long term. We really want to leave something that 20 or 50 or 70 years from now, people aren't complaining or saying we botched it or didn't do a good job. So this is your chance to just throw out ideas, and we're going to start with some discussion questions. The first one's being, what questions do you have about your role, or how can we make your participation meaningful? Or is there anyone that just wants to quit today after the first 45 minutes? So go ahead and unmute yourself if you just want to talk, because that's really what we wanted to do today.
I can start with a question. You mentioned, Alan, being a good neighbor. I'm just curious, what is the means by which we would get input from either surrounding landowners or other businesses in the area? Is it through the members of this, through the broader committee and this subcommittee, or are there other mechanisms planned?
Yeah, it's a great question, David. And maybe the first level is working with the metropolitan areas in the region and the regional planning entities. So we've already plugged them in on these working groups and been meeting with them separately. We're going to make sure that we've got the plans from each of the surrounding areas, their capital plans, and can make sure that our infrastructure fits in with it, and that the transportation structure that we outlined fits in with it. There are individual landowners in the area, as you know, and if you look further south, the gravel pits, some very significant land holdings. And we've been in conversations with those folks, and we'll continue to do that to make sure they know what we're thinking, we know what they're thinking, and are communicating as best we can. Just as an example, some of the surrounding property owners said, please keep us informed. We're going to wait to see what you're doing. One of the things we'd love is if you don't put up a fence around the whole project, but incorporate us into what you're doing. And I've got a meeting on Monday with a team that is planning a significant development right across the street, and they want to coordinate with us. So we'll continue that.
Just to add to that, we want to be really transparent. And so Muriel with X Factor, all of these meetings are public. She'll be doing PR if there's just anyone, surrounding landowner, somebody that lives 100 miles away, anybody that wants to know what's going on, all of this is out in the public. Also, don't forget that 2 board members are mayors of neighboring cities. So the mayor of South Jordan, mayor of Draper come, and they certainly hear from their constituents and the people that live in their cities. They're already hearing a lot of buzz in their ears. So we've just tried to make sure that the surrounding cities, some of the surrounding landowners, and then just any of the general public can find our website, can find our PR communications. We don't want this to just happen in a closed door situation and nobody knows about it. I've even posted on LinkedIn before, just said when our meetings are and if anybody wants to come listen, but we rarely have people from the public. We get sometimes a couple newspaper journalists show up sometimes.
I have a question. Go ahead, Lloyd.
Mine is less of a question. I can tell you some things I was thinking about, April and Alan, as you presented some of the background and some of the materials. My recollection is that this was the EDCU site for Amazon to build 8 million square feet as just a icon type of headquarters location for a powerful company. And if our role is economic development and recruiting, I'm sitting here trying to make a list of a dozen Amazons that are out there. And is that the task that you would like from me, is to continue to look for those type of opportunities to make sure if we think of them or certainly identify them, get them in front of this group so that whether it's the innovation center or the tech corporate headquarters or those type of key opportunities, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, on the back of my scratch paper, I'm trying to think of those type of pursuits. Am I on track?
You are, Lloyd. That's the type of stuff that we'd like to know from this group. Like, do you see Fortune 100? Do you see international companies, national companies, regional? Or is there just a tech company in Provo that we'd like to try to lure them to move their headquarters there? I mean, to be completely open, there's already been like a large stadium that's tried to put an offer saying they want to build a stadium there. And really right now, we've told everyone way too early. Like, we're not taking offers and selling this land. Prison hasn't moved, way too early. We just want to have a lot of communication right now so that as soon as we do a master plan, we plan it out properly, and that a lot of people are aware once land pieces start getting sold or companies come in, so that nobody feels like they really missed it.
Good. That's helpful. Thank you.
You know, one of the things I would highlight to that, there's a wonderful set of companies, obviously, that we would love to have to come to Utah. But in thinking about those companies, we also need to be very mindful of their requirements, and even then some of the reasons that it may have been a challenge to get Amazon to come here previously. We have to be very mindful of the type of workforce and people that tend to work at these companies and the types of amenities and environment in which they like to work. From an infrastructure perspective, from the type of living unit perspective, from the focus and marketing around sustainability, and around a lot of different types of smart technologies. So, again, in this case, is praise to Alan and to the board here about willing to assemble a diverse group like this that can think along all these different lines and can leverage our networks for the best case for the state. I definitely think coordinating all that is certainly going to be a job, right? So in that sense, Alan, don't envy you. But in any event, I just wanted to highlight that those are other things to think alongside of when we start to think about some of these big names in order to actually effectively deliver a proposition to them that, they'd be more than happy to sign up for.
That's such
Thanks,
an important point. And I think that's exactly one of the questions that we want to spend some time on today when the time's right, is what are those things that companies would be looking for that we ought to be trying to incorporate in this site? And as we put together an RFP in the next couple of months, what should we be driving those planners to include? So that's a perfect question, Joseph. Thank you.
And remember, this may not just be about luring commercial sector clients. I mean, a lot of us have chatted about, well, what happens if there's a university that maybe wants to do some type of joint venture with a tech company and teach, the kids that are 5, 6, 10 years old right now. Maybe there's some certain type of artificial intelligence or machine learning or drone technology, something that we need to be teaching them, some type of institute of technology, so that as all those tech companies that are around Silicon Slopes or even other parts of the state need those workers 10 or 15 years from now, maybe part of this acreage is a learning center or an AI center. And then we're pushing out the kids that have new skills that we didn't even think about when we were coming out of college. So we have to remember that too, that we're not just looking for commercial. We also don't want the surrounding area, the neighbors, everybody to say, oh, you just caused a pollution nightmare. You've just caused tons of traffic. Can we bring people in a different way? Can we bore a hole with, Elon Musk's boring company? Or can we bring people in with drones? Do we say cars are allowed? Are part of it? Are they not allowed? We're literally trying to think that much into the future.
April,
The question
sorry,
that
go ahead.
I had, I'm sorry. Yeah, the question I had is down the road, do you foresee that this 700-acre development area is going to become part of a different city, one of the neighboring cities? Or is it likely to be its own city? And would there be opportunities then when we're talking to these companies and looking at these opportunities for us to also talk about how the governance of this area would function in the future?
Lou, do you want to add your comment and then we'll have Alan kind of answer all of it?
Thanks, April. I was simply going to say, given your comments and the others here, how does this coordinate with the inland port plans, and what kind of role do we have to ensure that we're cooperating and going forward on the same path? And I think it goes to Thor's question as well. So thank you for allowing me to add that.
Those are great. To Thor's question, this site is all within Draper city limits. And so I think the future is that it will remain part of Draper. They'll provide municipal services. We're working with them on an interlocal agreement to kind of outline that process, what governance will look like. So I think that's what we would expect going forward. And with the inland port, yes, we've had ongoing conversations with them. We do see a lot of synergy there. I think different missions are going to look different. Theirs is going to be a little more industrial and more manufacturing, but we can see maybe some opportunities to bring rail through this site, or at least near the site. We could be generating new ideas at this site, commercializing them, and then doing the manufacturing closer to the inland port. I mean, we've talked to so many companies who have said, we've got great ideas that are developed here, but we don't have a place to manufacture them. Maybe that we can create jointly some of that dynamic.
With regard to the overall project, is there some thoughts around the allocation of land area within the development for tech development, for corporate offices, for education, for laboratory, for training? I'd like to get a sense on the proportional weighting of those various endeavors as part of the overall project.
That has not been determined yet. Sorry, Alan, I just noticed you were about to speak. First, I wanted to go back to Joseph's comment a minute ago. So that's really forward thinking. We appreciate that, Joseph, because I think one of the things will be that we're not trying to recruit companies that just don't fit here or aren't even going to want to be here. We do, as a board, just want to stay involved long enough that this is a boon to our economy and to Utah long term, and that it's not a bust. And there are people around that are like, we don't even want to develop it, like leave it open space, because they just don't want more congestion and inviting more people to move to our state. So our board is made up of some people with stronger idealists and some people with stronger realist personalities, and we're just trying to kind of meet in the middle. And then part of that's why we're going out to you guys also. And then to finish your question, Bill, that's what's not determined yet. We don't know if it's going to be 100% commercial, part resi, part education, a whole bunch of open space. Do we have something cool like the Bean in Chicago where people come down to see that? Do we have really nice outdoor restaurants? I was joking with Alan, but I was kind of serious. I was like, back in the 80s when I got here to Utah, I found out that the kids in Spanish Fork on a Friday night, because they didn't have cell phones, if they wanted to find people, they drove up and down Main Street. So do we have like a cool area with like 50 restaurants that are real one of a kind and bistro lights everywhere, and people can go down there on a Friday night and walk around and run into someone that they haven't seen for 10 years and start a new tech company? They decide that night to start a new company. So we're hoping to create like a cool area in there also. Maybe where you're not having to go all the way down to downtown just to find a good restaurant. Things like that.
Alan, this is Derek Miller. Could I make a comment?
Please.
When we're talking specifically to the point of, who we might recruit, who we might attract here, I want to throw something out. It's a bit of an intangible, but I think it's really important and ought to be towards the top of any list of criteria that we may develop. And that is bringing in companies, organizations that not just buy into the vision of this, but want to contribute to it. And the reason I mention that is because having some experience in this recruitment realm, I know that it's easy to fall into a pitfall of chasing the dollars. And it happens on both sides, right? On one side, you could have, the government that just is chasing big names and wants to get, the big name that isn't necessarily a great community partner. On the other hand, it was always evident to me when I worked at GoEd, it was just so quickly evident whether or not the company was doing what I called a dialing for dollars exercise. It was just sort of whoever's going to give me the most money, whoever's going to give me the land for free, whoever's going to build me a building, that's where I'm going to go. And you just knew off the bat that this was not going to be a great partnership. So I would love for us to think about who we recruit in terms of who buys into the vision and who wants to contribute to it. I was so glad to see on this call my friend Jonathan Frankham. I haven't seen Jonathan in a long time, but Jonathan and I worked together a dozen years ago on that Adobe project, and they would be a great example of someone who came and contributed. It was a real partnership, but not all of those have worked out as well as Adobe did. And Adobe ought to be, our gold standard for somebody who wanted to come for the right reasons, who, turned that point of the mountain into a 10x, and who gave back and continues to give back to the community. But like I said, not all of them do.
Agreed, 100%. And speaking personally, I know Adobe has done a significant amount in the community, and finding, community players like that should be a priority. That leads into my thought just around branding. Like you mentioned, a lot of the different working groups, there's a lot of inherent overlap, right? That there has to be. But thinking around branding, sustainability and the way in which we do this, I think could also open itself up to a lot of unique, co-branding scenarios that can help attract a lot of different companies. So, I think back, a lot of the clients that I have, happen to be, very well-known personalities, and all of them that I can think of have a very strong tint towards sustainability and the environment. And so I think to the degree, without going overboard, as I would say, right, but certainly care quite a bit about it. I can easily see a scenario, if we were thinking it through, where, they may like to attach their name to something like this. I've had, for example, it's one thing, I've had Wesley Snipes come in and join me for a call with the World Trade Center. I've had Eddie Murphy join me for other calls. I do a good amount of work here with an organization founded by Leonardo DiCaprio, which focuses on sort of sustainable energy development, and with a school, a wonderful school founded by James Cameron and his wife, called Muse Academy. That they were very interested in expanding into Utah, and so I think there's also an opportunity, I would say, to within a very coordinated marketing strategy and at the right time to if the message is right and we're really sticking to those principles, I think a lot of these folk would love to attach themselves to a project of this scale, done properly, and I can facilitate those conversations.
Thank you, Joe.
This is Stan. I think it's important that we don't put all of our eggs into one basket. So I really like the notion of targeting maybe the Fortune 100, or, maybe there's a different definition of what we're going to go after, but then have contingency plans, because I find many times that in spite of our best efforts and in spite of the fact that we think that this is an ideal site for a major tenant, sometimes for whatever reason they choose not to come. And so actually having those major tenants tend to bring in a whole bunch of secondary economic opportunities for the state. There's something about having the biggest in the world in your state that makes others want to come to your state. So I think it's going back to this notion that we need to have some targets. I think that is absolutely the right approach. We need to be careful and deliberate on who we're targeting and why. I think Derek's comments that they need to be contributors has to be a part of the decision making on who we're targeting and why. But we just shouldn't put all of our eggs in any one basket, and make sure that if for some reason our target companies choose not to come, that we have every bit as robust a backup plan that can make this site be everything we want.
Could I ask a question, maybe building off of Stan's comment there, and maybe it's a question to you, Alan, or to Lloyd or Lou, which is, could you share a few thoughts on the likely sequence of events? You mentioned having a master plan, and we've been talking about recruiting companies. Seems like it would be hard to recruit companies before there's a master plan. And so are there phases of recruiting where you're just getting input from potential customers or potential tenants, I should say, as input to a master plan without any commitments, and then the master plan and then real recruiting? That's what I'm imagining, but I just wanted to get that out on the table and get some experts to comment on that.
Yeah, I'll make a fool of myself and then let the experts clarify. But I think our thinking is we want to get some ideas from you and from potential companies, what they'd like to see at the site. So we build that into the master plan. And then once we have a master plan, yes, then you can take that out and say, we'd like you to be part of this. Would like you to be the anchor. So we're not going to be targeting specific companies really until we have a pretty good idea of what our master plan is. We want to be able to accomplish the goals of the state, and that's going to be reflected in the master plan. And then we hope those we recruit will be facilitating accomplishing that goal.
One of the things to chime in there, clearly, with thoughtfulness to the types of industries where we have some type of competitive advantage in, and the ones that we want to encourage to actually be here. The best case scenario would be to have those lists and begin a dialogue, kind of a consultative dialogue with them about the types of things they would like to see, both in the site and then other things that's here within the state, that maybe this site can facilitate. And even in coordination with some of the other projects here, like the inland port, et cetera, and so forth, that might be, an extra, compelling for them. So I would certainly see that process happening in parallel, because you'd want to get that input in, and then digest and integrate it.
Dave, I would just weigh in a little bit there and in how, my experience of watching development go. There are very few, Amazon headquarter type of opportunities where you'll be building millions of square feet for somebody who's helped you design it and helped you identify exactly what they're looking for. The player who sits in the middle most of the time is the developer, who comes up with the master plan like Alan is describing, and then puts a lot of skin into the game to create something that they think a user will want, and they take that down in much smaller pieces than what a 700-acre site is, thus lending to the real value of these groups helping the state and helping maybe a developer in a private partner relationship take the initial steps in putting together the right master plan and beginning to create the product. And you hope along the way that you get some good opportunities to do a build-to-suit type of project where you've got the user right in hand. Maybe exceptions to that. Boy, Alan, Lou, and others, exceptions to that may be significant government-driven opportunities like an innovation center, like a university, or some federal use that may be very appealing on the site.
And could I ask, when does we don't have a developer, right? I mean, that's one of the questions, Alan, I believe, is what's the role of the state? Is it just developing the plan? Is it the developer? Is it the landlord, et cetera, the operator? So I don't know, again, Alan or others, what is the timing or point in the sequence when a developer would be identified who would help make those final decisions on what, how out on the fringe you want to be with your plan and how you use the shared space, et cetera?
That's exactly the conversation we're having right now, and it's going to be part of our conversation in our board meeting in August. Aaron, if you're there, do you want to just give a quick overview of kind of the research you're doing and some of the recommendations you're working on?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Alan. And it's a really good question because that's probably the gateway question for a lot of the to answering a lot of things that you all have asked over the last few minutes. We've been looking at case studies of how other similar organizations have pursued this scale of development, especially ones that had very similar goals to accomplish things other than just achieving the highest value for the land, right? So that included some of these economic development, or other corporate attraction goals, as well as placemaking and broader community benefits that Alan alluded to earlier. And probably the most important thing for this group to take away and that we've shared with the board is that there isn't a perfect analog of a group that's done this before. There's lots of similar places, airport and military base redevelopments. Some innovation districts have similar structures where there's a state or local government entity that really owns the land and pursued it. And so we're really drawing from what these groups have done well and what they've struggled with to help think through how that might work here. And as you all have kind of pulled together, there's obviously going to be some sort of partner or multiple partners involved. I think we've heard fairly clearly from the board so far that they don't want to turn into a developer and do something that the private sector could probably do better. And so there's a lot of different flavor within that of how it really proceeds. But we're working with Alan and April and the board right now to help them think through what that role looks like, how that translates into an actual transaction structure, and what that means for who they need to be internally to be able to execute that. And so, our expectation is that we'll have direction on that in the short term, but that, it really is the state's role to put forward the first master plan, which is a framework for how the site would work and a kind of a declaration almost of what the state and POMSA want to accomplish here. To make sure that whatever partner we do find following that first master plan, really understands what they're taking on, whether that's a piece of the site or the full site.
This is April again. Lloyd and David and a couple of the others, just to kind of give you an idea. The state knows that the state's not a developer. But on the flip side, state's not ready to sell it out real early, just raw land, and let somebody else come in and develop the whole thing, because we're trying to match that interest of the residents of Utah, where there's a financial return, but also we've left something nice there for generations to come. So we could have already joined Draper City, but then of course that land would potentially be beholden to Draper zoning and what Draper allows, and so developers would then be taking their plans to Draper City. So the idea is, how long should the state stay involved to try to get a nice return for the residents? Because part of the moving the prison was that there was going to be a return, but also what type of that return is not just financial, and that there's a societal return and other things that people see down the pipeline. So we're not 100% ready to turn it over to a developer, but yet we're all aware that the state's not a developer. So this might end up being like a joint venture or something like that. We're really open to those ideas, and we're really open to your guys' skills and talents and experience, so that you can give us some of the pros and cons of what you've seen happen before, or what you foresee could be a better path down the road now.
In April, that was very well said. And I like the idea of, with this group, we talk about a master plan, we think about development. And what you talked about, what I heard from you is, what are these objectives, which we have in place? And there's an effort of creating a strategy or a framework that will deliver on those objectives. There's a financial return, but also a return on objective for the state. And then once that's put into place, then there's a role probably for the developer to come in and put out in the real detailed work of a master plan, in the sense that we think of it is people involved in investment in commercial real estate. In terms of that strategy, one thing that I would propose, and Alan, we've talked about this, is if innovation is an important component of it, which is it, we all agree is, there could be a structure that the state can put into place built around centers of excellence. And so there may be some institution building that could be put into place that would help inform and shape the master planning process a developer would do. But within the centers of excellence, you could have, like Joseph was talking about earlier, you could pick key industries here in the state. So maybe you have one on healthcare innovation. One maybe is a focus on artificial intelligence, which is the next generation of software as a service, which we do very well here. One could be aerospace and defense, to include drone technology, advanced materials, and there could be other industries as well. But within each of these centers of excellence, you could have industry-leading R&D occurring, and that helps inform the recruitment decision. You could have a university national lab extension from Idaho or something like that, the real deep research aspect to it. And then you could also have service providers, whether that's the government agencies that can help streamline regulation and getting approvals for things. You could have investment funds and others. And then you could also have a shared lab space, whether it's a wet lab in the healthcare innovation or other things. This is similar to what we saw in Paris with the governor and legislative leaders on a trade mission last year. It's Station F, which is the largest incubator in the world. It's the great thing about it, which resonates here in Utah, is it's privately owned and operated. Within Station F, it's a retrofit freight rail yard. They have Google and Microsoft and Facebook. They have lots of different startups. They have VC funds. They have government people to help connect with all the different innovation programs that governments have. And it's a really cool dynamic, and it brings all these pieces together to make for some very, very successful innovation happening. And so that's just one idea. There's a million different ideas, but I think that structure then, if in place, if it's a strategy that will help accomplish those objectives, then will be very informative in terms of what type of companies ought to be recruited, because then we have very specific criteria for how we want them to contribute. In a centers of excellence case, it would be, companies that are looking not to just put in, operations or anything else, but they're looking to do R&D. They're looking to do innovation here in this place. And so, hats off to April, you and Alan, and everybody else for thinking through this very methodically. But I would suggest that the strategy is put in place to accomplish those objectives. Once that is fully baked, public input, ready to go, then you have an opportunity to pass it off to a developer. But that developer has is more an implementer as opposed to a designer.
Thank you, Miles.
Yeah, Miles, that's great feedback.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Agreed. I like that approach.
One of the things I'll throw out there to everyone right now is I wanted to learn a little bit of information and maybe pass on to our board. If anyone knows very much about the Innovation Campus up at Utah State, I know they're in Cache Valley. They've got about 40 acres that'll eventually be 150 acres, and it's an innovation campus. Well, those of us maybe that have ties to Utah County or Salt Lake County, being a couple hours away might as well be, 2 states away. So it's not really wrong if we look at maybe doing something duplicative. The kids maybe that go to learn something right around here aren't the same kids that even want to go up to Cache Valley. But I don't have a lot of experience with it or heard if it's really been helpful or has a lot of pros and cons. So maybe if any of you have an idea about that, because again, we've got nearly 700 acres. So let's say we come up with 100 or 150 acre innovation campus, and maybe we've got commercial tech companies, restaurants, retail, some penthouse apartments on top of commercial. I don't know. I foresee that we could potentially have a lot of different zoning down there, but maybe some of these anchor things aren't a company, but it's more built around education. We also have an education group, and I'm going to probably have to sit in on some of their meetings, even though I'm not on that committee, just to kind of hear what's going on there.
April, just to elevate even more so what you just said, you need to have it. I would advocate very strongly that it's not an either or scenario. Like if you really want to get those best in class companies, you also want to have kind of a learning campus, an innovation campus in play there. You're going to need that as if we really want to do this thing right and different and align it even with some of the best global models that we've seen, similar to what Miles had mentioned about Paris, about how you actually would attract some of these other names. It's not just the land, and we focus so much on, let's say, a go-ed incentive, and those things are great to have, but they are by and far not really the biggest decision-making point for a lot of these companies. Is going to be these other ancillary things. Now, the types of infrastructure that we put into place, is it very forward thinking or is it run of the mill? What is the network knowledge environment like in that place? And so those types of innovation centers that you're referencing are necessary components to driving a culture of innovation in that environment, from which these companies would want to hire people from and or lend their people to participate in. So it's a key part of the structure.
Can I connect a couple of dots? This is Steve.
Steve, if one thing, if I could just close that point off, and then pardon for the time on that. What I would like to do, I think there's an interesting opportunity. A lot of those companies that we're speaking about, I interact with their senior people socially. And so, so instead of like a half an hour meeting, I may be with them for a couple of days. And so I think there's an opportunity there that once we get to the right point here to package this up and be able to have a real engagement with these different leaders around what they would think and how they would envision and contribute to an environment like this. And so happy to take that part of the conversation offline. And Stephen, my apologies. Go ahead.
No, I thought you were done. I think I was going to say kind of what you just said, in that we were talking earlier about, well, how do we go get companies if we don't have a master plan? We don't have anything to sell. We don't have an environment, to pitch. This idea of centers of excellence is interesting, because it seems to me, and I think this is kind of what you're saying, is if we define those and we define who the key players are within the region, and then reach out to them to be a resource to help us design the master plan so that it actually is attractive and aligns with the needs and preferences of those particular industries. And there's multiple benefits of doing that. And one is Well, you learn how to do a better master plan that has the synergies that you're looking for. But the second one is that you're indirectly recruiting them, to ultimately be a potential, tenant. And thirdly, as you're right, there's networking that will occur, and word will get out in that industry of what you're trying to do. So that Centers of Excellence program could actually occur at any time. It would never be too early to define those groups and start organizing a process to engage them.
Just along those same lines, April, I'm happy to report back to you on what is happening up at Utah State University. I'm involved up there right now, and Joseph and I are both working with some of the people who are involved in creating centers of excellence and the kind of innovation and the other investment, the kind of things that we're talking about that's going on up at Utah State. So I don't want to try to report just little fragments right now, but I can circle back by the time of our next month meeting and possibly have more specifics for the group and for you in particular to provide more insight into how things are developing at USU and what the connection to technology at USU might be for our side as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you could kind of keep both me and Alan's had a lot more meetings. Again, he's doing this full time, and I'm a board member meeting, a couple times a month with people. But I'd like to know more about that. And then also, Alan, I don't know if you want maybe offline later on to get Stephen ramped up on the different companies that you and I have already talked to, or tech companies that we've had discussions with. These are really, really super early, high level discussions, just saying, similar to this group. What do you foresee? Is there any what would you want to see going on there? We just want to talk to and get as much input from anybody as we can so that we can divest a whole bunch of information off to the master planner and get this planned right, and not just hand it over to somebody and let them tell us what's going on with the master plan.
Yeah.
And I'll just say the Centers of Excellence idea is a great one, and it's one that has been very much on our minds. And I've had conversations with the leadership at Utah State, at University of Utah, UVU, BYU, Idaho National Labs, and others. And there's tremendous interest in trying to do something. We're working closely with high-tech and biotech industries to identify what they think their peers and they would like to see at the site. And it's been really interesting. I mean, we've gotten to the point of saying we don't have a clinical hospital that does clinical research here in Utah. And so we've got some conversations starting with folks at the University of Utah about that, so we could have biotech companies developing treatments, devices, drugs that could then be put into clinical trials right here in Utah. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's exactly the kind of conversation that we've been having recently and looking at what others are doing around the country. So I think that's going to be important.
So do we have a list, the definitive list of the circles of excellence?
No, and that's what I think we've been asking. We talked to the innovation group about that very question. We'll raise it here. Where are our strengths as a region? What should we be focusing on? We can't be all things to all people, but are there 2 or 3 areas where we ought to be spending our resources trying to build? Excellent.
And Alan, you've done a great job shepherding us along and bringing a lot of people together. I'm going to walk into a field that probably has a lot of landmines, but I would suggest that once you identify those key areas, that we ask ourselves, who is the best in the world to participate? And if it's the University of Utah, fantastic. But if it's a university in California or in Europe or elsewhere, then we should not limit ourselves to people who are here locally or regionally. But I do think that there's an opportunity to act like a global player and to treat this as a global opportunity and not a regional one. And so I just would strongly encourage that. And obviously we've got tremendous expertise here in our local universities and our companies here. We want to build on that. There should be a role for them to shape it and form it. But we shouldn't self-limit ourselves. And we should swing for the fences, because I think that we have all the ingredients to make it truly world-class and not just a regional initiative.
Agreed. Well said.
May I just say that this has been a great discussion. I do know that uh, there's some political, and I look at Stan Lockhart and Derek Miller and others who know how to navigate other landmines, because I'm sure that UVU and Utah, University of Utah says, wait a minute, this is us, closest to us. Why should we let Utah State jump in? I'm just saying that's the practicality. I used to represent the Space Dynamics Lab up there, and we went up 15 years ago and asked what could they commercialize, and the only thing that we could come up with was Aggie ice cream. We said, guys, we've got to look bigger than this. And I still remember our frustration. We weren't looking bigger. May I just say that 700 acres is, as we said at the outset, it's really the core, but the surrounding areas, we have to do the infrastructure and everything else as part of the work we're doing. I appreciate so much Miles talking about these other opportunities in the business we made. And I look at Alan Matheson and I get tired knowing that he's trying to do all of this. I mean, obviously April and others are helping him, but we have to look at what is working around the world. And Alan, we can't put you on an airplane all by yourself to do that. I do also know, and Alan, I think, Lloyd will say the same thing, that Research Park at University of Utah is pretty full. They need space too. The University of Utah Valley and BYU have both said we don't really have a research park. That ought to be our game. So we look forward to some very smart political minds on this board helping us get through those landmines as well. But it is really, really exciting. I am delighted at this approach of, don't let the state get out too late. Don't let the developers get in too early. It's our ideas. It's not somebody from, Germany going to tell us how to do this, because we know what we need in many ways, but we'll certainly take that input in. So again, my thanks for everybody on this. Has been, when I was in the Army, I had a general who always said, all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And I've taken 2 pages of notes here, and I'm just really impressed. So thank you. Thank you.
Well said, Lou. Can I go back to, we had a chance for questions a bit earlier. I thought I've seen 2 or 3 general master plans. And I don't know if those are just high level thinking that's out there, but I would be very intrigued to see what is currently out there that divides it up into centers of excellence or the like, or maybe none of those plans that I've seen are tied to any official statement. But if there's something that's out there, I'd like to see it. And then is the RFP, Alan, that you're going forward with, is it what I would describe as a municipal master plan that establishes, areas of zoning, some type of statement or preference? Or are you looking for the RFP and for input from these groups to even go a bit deeper, to where you start to map out centers of excellence, research parks, corporate headquarters? Where is the point of the mountain at? And Aaron may know the answer to that too. I'd like to make sure I'm current and not recovering old ground anywhere.
Alan, before you start, I wanted to emphasize that with Lloyd too. Lloyd, when I joined this board 2 years ago, I went and looked up online, and I think I found stuff for the Point of the Mountain Development Commission, where someone had come in and put a whole drawing and website, and I was like, wow, this is really far along already. And I haven't heard one bit about that commission or those drawings or anything since we've been on the board. So I think those were ideas a couple years ago, but they're really, and I know like even Draper City has drawn up stuff too. But Alan, if you want to kind of emphasize that none of those plans are approved and those aren't our board's plans.
That's right. Draper City a few years ago wanted to show that this area could be intensely developed, and they put some concepts together that had high rises in a dense pattern. The Development Commission did some amazing work, and including Aaron and her team doing some great market research. And they had a group called HOK Architects from San Francisco that took some of those ideas and presented a concept for the site. We view that as valuable input, but it's not a master plan. And so we're taking lessons from it as part of this outreach, but that's not the point for the site. We brought Steve on, and I just talked to him yesterday for the first time about doing this, or at least told him yesterday that we were going to hire him. So we're early in the process, but we're going to design that RFP. And I would say that your second statement is a little closer to what we're looking at. It won't be bubbles on the map. It'll be more detailed than that, showing the types of development we would like to see, the goals that we have. And maybe Steve, you can add more than I can.
Yeah, I mean, yet to be completely determined, but I agree. I think it's much more the second level, where I think the depth of thinking and research and sort of vision that the various working groups are coming up with, we really want them to be embedded in the plan. I mean, we really want the plan to evolve to become a framework in which all of those aspirations can find a home, and the master plan support them and inspire them ambitiously. On the other hand, one of the secrets of successful large-scale master planning is not to get too detailed, because whatever you think, whatever we draw, every building we draw on that plan, I can tell you it's going to be something different, because the real world, the market, and the cyclical market and the market shifts that occur, as you all know, because you're in the business, requires us to create a plan that has flexibility. So I like to think of it really almost more as a framework plan than a detailed master plan, where we're going to create what I call good bones, of circulation, and there will be land use allocations and land use balances and so forth, because we have to run traffic analysis, and we have to do, we have to design infrastructure systems. And so that has to be based on something. So there will be baseline assumptions on a product mix that RCL Co. and all this process will help us come up with. But we're also going to build in flexibility so that as things shift and change, we can move with that without losing momentum. Does that help?
Thanks, Stephen. I think we all know that sometimes creatives or artists don't have a dollar or putting it on pencil when they create it. So it can be beautiful. It can be posted online. You can see all kinds of pictures. But then on the flip side, Lou and Lloyd and all these people that have the commercial developers that are going to come in, we know it has to make sense on paper. Mm-hmm. So we know what they're buying at raw and entitlements and building and everything has got to make sense. So that's part of bringing you guys into this, so that we don't just create this master plan based on a creative side of a mind only, and that we can do the logistics and the financial. And Aaron has very much a strong background in that real estate and financial. And then same thing with Stephen. So Stephen's a consultant of ours, Aaron's a consultant. And we appreciate that, because we know, like I said before, there's idealism and there's reality, and we're just trying to marry the two.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. And Lloyd, to jump in for a second, on the development commission work, that was a major public outreach effort, and I would describe the planning work that it came up with as a vision plan for the broader Point of the Mountain area. So, I think, we showed that map earlier in the presentation at the beginning that kind of had that bubble going all the way from Sandy, down south of Lehigh. And, really the scope of that study was to think about the broader region and all the different places, including the different sites within it that might develop, and some of the ways in which those sites might develop. And so there are some diagrams of how, within that, of how this site might develop, and I think they represent, what we heard from the public and what we learned from the market analysis, and the, aspirations for the site to be, more than just, a real estate development. But they're a good basis for us to learn from, but they're certainly not, it helps us move forward. It's not a plan in itself that we can implement today.
But we warn everybody out. I want to make sure.
I still have, Alan, I still have one question. This is Steve. and I guess I'm asking this question because I think some of it's going to land on my shoulders, but we've identified this. Let me just make a statement, and you guys tell me if I'm right or wrong. And this isn't, I don't think this is a new idea. I think this has already been identified, as Alan said, but we're going to identify 4 or 5 or 6 centers of excellence. And those centers of excellence are going to be an organizing, kind of create an organizational sort of framework for this group to identify key companies and key content to help inform the planning process. Do we agree with that?
I think that's right. And one of the things that this group can help us do is identify what our regional strengths are. What should those centers of excellence be? And I think any ideas you have would be really welcome.
I mean, one thought would be to, because I think where I'm going to is how do we get to that list, that we kind of believe in. And I think you have sort of challenged us to make sure that list is one that is realistic and it builds on our regional resources and strengths. So I'm wondering, how do we get at those 2 items? And I'm wondering if we couldn't have a little bit of an exercise offline here, where we maybe do a questionnaire is a little bit too formal, but kind of ask everybody to sort of list, go through a little bit of a thought process on, what are the key strengths of the region, and then what centers of excellence, what industries do you think those lead to? And then for the next meeting, we could sort of compile that and analyze and sort of synthesize a little bit and report on what the group came up with.
Yeah, I think we can do that. And I have actually been talking to a guy who's going to be a member of this, couldn't be here today. It's developed a process to help groups kind of work through those questions and come up with ideas. In this case, what those centers of excellence ought to be. What are our strengths? What are the opportunities, et cetera? It's a modified SWOT analysis, much more directed toward action and answers. So we may draw on that as well.
Hey, Alan, this is Mike Flynn. I wanted to, I guess, tee up and depending on how you're talking about areas of strength, if you're thinking of industry areas of strength, the state 15 years ago commissioned a pretty extensive study to identify where Utah was truly best in class, down to about a 6-digit NAICS code. And that has been the framework of the state's cluster industry initiative for the last 15 years. The governor's office and EDC Utah are currently working on reevaluating that, looking at where do we have a density of employment, where do we have a density of research, where do we have truly world-class companies, what industries look like they might be more relevant moving forward, where do we have embedded assets, things like an Air Force base or world-class ski resorts, or all of these sort of, we just call them embedded assets, things that other places don't have. And how do you put all that together to figure out where we really are world-class, not maybe where we want to be or where we think we are, but where does the data point us to say, yes, we have a competitive advantage in these places that can be quantified. So that could maybe be part of this discussion or help kick off maybe a qualitative discussion based on what some of this data points to. But, I do think if you look at where do we have a density of employment in areas that pay higher than average wages or are above a minimum threshold from a wage standpoint, that include things like significant capital investment, that include things like leveraging embedded assets. I think that maybe gets you some way down the path to this conversation of where do we really have some world-class expertise that could be the framework of a centers of excellence discussion. So I don't know if it needs to be reinvented from square one. I'm certainly not saying this is the end-all be-all, but it could be the jumpstart to, I guess, maybe a more elaborate conversation.
I was sure there was something like that out there, and I'm glad you raised that, because that's exactly the kind of starting point we need.
Yeah, Mike, this is Erin. Do you have a sense of when you all might have a draft of that or some ideas out of that you'd be able to share with this group?
I do, and I think the cliff notes are it's not going to change significantly. You know, the industries that made sense 10 years ago, the data still supports that we have some competitive advantage there. Some of those might broaden, or when you get down to a 6-digit NAICS code, we might add a few things in. But I would say 70% of it's going to stay the same. We probably will expand some, we'll narrow some others, but it won't change tremendously. If you, and I can put a link in the chat, if you go to our website, we have industry profiles that we've built on all of these that talk about who's here, who's growing, what is our cost advantage, what are some of these embedded assets that we have. So we've done a lot of the research. We use it as we go out and pitch companies sort of on the broader state. And so again, some of this work may have been done. We might be halfway down the path already.
Okay. Yeah, I know I've seen your old one, so it's great that you guys are working on that right now. And especially to the extent that there might be some places where there's embedded assets and, you know, strong growth, but, you know, there could be something that we would do here, or, you know, a company or other group that we would attract that would really help, you know, stabilize and grow something that has a lot of potential.
I think one fair critique is that a lot of this is backwards looking, and maybe not as forward as people would like. And so there's probably a discussion around, okay, this is where we're at today, you know, get the smartest people in the room and figure out what does this turn into 20 or 30 years from now. That's probably a valid discussion. But at least what we have would give you some sort of sense of where do we have advantage today.
Yeah,
spot
that's
on.
something I'd love to hear this group discuss in the future.
Yeah, spot on, Michael. Because there, and as we think about that, where we are today, there are areas that are tangential to each of those, and then there's the synergy of them that move into areas where we just really need to be in, where we need to develop an expertise that would enhance them. So, like for example, you know, AI. We don't really have anywhere in the state right now any of the universities that have really dug in pretty deeply into that. But it is highly tangential to areas where we are leaders in, right? So if you look at either as electrified, autonomous and connected vehicles, we've got a good beachhead, a very strong beachhead in that area, and then a few others that would lend themselves to growing into some of these other areas that are very hot right now and going to be hot for a long time, because they're going to determine, the state of the whole economy over the next 5-10 years or so. So, you know, certainly very interested in plugging into that process. But that's, you know, spot on. I think that's the way to think about it.
This is April again. Just to put another little bug in your guys' ear. I mean, this may be something where we're reaching out all the way to like an MIT or a Stanford. And I know this meeting's being recorded, and that will probably offend people at University of Utah and Utah Valley University. And don't get me wrong, I graduated from BYU. I've had 2 kids graduate and go to school at UVU. Another kid graduate from BYU already. I love our local schools, but it doesn't mean that we don't maybe even talk or collaborate with an MIT or a Stanford, or can MIT and Utah Valley or University of Utah do some type of collaboration with us with this innovation center. So we're happy to hear ideas from you guys that don't just have to do with our local. If any of you want to sit in, like I said, I'm going to probably start sitting on the education meeting. I just think this is a really neat redevelopment opportunity. This 700 acres could be a driving force that kind of marries the economy of Salt Lake and Utah County. We've got really educated workers from both areas. Muriel's talked about before how sometimes that live, work, play term is overused. So you're going to hear us use the term innovation a lot. But we're also, Alan and I are available anytime offline too. If there's just a conversation or a little bug in our ear that you want to put, or if you want to unload a little bit more information to us or have more questions, you don't always need to wait once a month until this monthly meeting. Feel free to reach out to any of us.
And along the line, I'm going to give you some contact information if you want to get in touch with me. 801-554-5496 is the phone number, or Alan Matheson at utah.gov. And I think some of the things that we'll be thinking about after this call is some ways that we might be able to reach out and just get you to put down some of your priorities. Again, as I said, maybe the first thing we're going to do is try to get ideas that need to be included in the RFP to make sure that we get a planning team that has the right skills, the right focus. And then we'll be working more on what that framework master plan looks like, and then a little further down the road, focusing more on recruitment and investment. So we'll be trying to reach out to you between these meetings a little bit, not overwhelm you. I don't want you to have to spend too much time. This is something that I think can benefit all of us. So if to the extent you're willing, reach out and continue to share. Thanks.
Thank you. Great discussion.
Great.
Oh, the other thing, let's not forget that Val, so half of our co-chair, it wasn't even here today, and Val brings great things to the table, great ideas, great talent. So that would be another person. If you have any questions or input, feel free to reach out to Val, and we're hopeful that next month's meeting works out for him to join us. I'm really glad I got to meet all of you guys today, and it's nice that we could do a video meeting so we could kind of see each other's faces and have some type of introduction in this strange COVID world right now.
Many thanks.
All right. I think that's our signal to wrap up, isn't it? Listen, everybody, I can't thank you enough. You're busy. You're involved in a lot of things, but this has been encouraging to me. It's the first of many conversations, but there aren't many places that have so many people willing to collaborate for the greater good of our community. And you've got our thanks, and we'll continue to rely on you. I don't know, April, we should probably wrap up. Any concluding thoughts?
No, just again, thanks for everyone's time and input. We know your time is extremely valuable. I was really grateful to meet everyone today and to listen to all of your input. And look forward to talking to you a month from now, or again, offline. In the chat, I put my cell phone, my email. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. We foresee a great partnership with all of you and helping us develop something really neat for generations to come.
Stay well, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.